Good evening, you're watching World News Tonight on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. We're not going to fly around the world at the drop of a hat to mediate meetings. That's the message from the US State Department as speculation builds over America's role in Ukraine peace talks. More on that in just a moment. But first, the latest headlines. Germany's spy agency says the far-right AfD party is an extremist force. TikTok is fined hundreds of millions of euros for sending user data to China. And a public holiday to celebrate Poland's national flag. America's State Department says it's now up to Ukraine and Russia to strike a peace deal. That echoes similar comments made by Secretary of State Marco Rubio in recent days, with Vice President J.D. Vance warning last month that the country could walk away from negotiations completely. Our Ukraine correspondent Oz Cadier joins us live now from Kyiv. Good evening, Oz. What can you tell us about today's developments and how has Ukraine responded?
So with regards to today's developments, there's been no response from Ukraine. President Zelensky put his nightly statement out and there's been no response there. And I would say that that's probably the only response that can come from Kyiv, because we haven't had a formal change in policy from the White House. But we are now hearing US officials grow increasingly frustrated with the process, a process that they pitched that Donald Trump would be able to get done within his first day of office. Then they pitched that he would be able to get it done within 100 days of being in office. Now they've extended that by another 100 days and are now threatening to walk away from the process they initiated. Let's listen to the US State Department spokesperson, Tammy Bruce, giving her opinion on the way the US views these current talks and their part to play in it going forward.
While our style will change, the methodology of how we contribute to this will change, in that we will not be the mediators. That is what I mentioned on Tuesday, and the nature of how this would change is we certainly were still committed to it and will help and do what we can, but we are not going to fly around the world at the drop of a hat to mediate meetings. That it is now between the two parties, and now is the time that they need to present and develop concrete ideas about how this conflict is going to end. It's going to be up to them.
Well, if it was that simple, I would suggest that Russia probably wouldn't have invaded Ukraine to begin with if they could just get around the table and discuss these things. Now, these comments echo what J.D. Vance, the US Vice President, has been saying in a recent interview. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
I really don't believe that any person, of the 8 billion people in the world, I don't think anybody could have gotten this deal done other than Donald J. Trump. When I say this deal, I mean getting these guys to actually propose a peace settlement, but it's going to be up to the Russians and the Ukrainians. Now that each side knows what the other's terms for peace are, it's going to be up to them to come to an agreement and stop this brutal, brutal conflict. It's not going anywhere, Brett. It's not going to end anytime soon.
So according to the US Vice President there, only Donald Trump was able to get the Ukrainians and the Russians to say what either side wanted. However, we've understood from those conditions that they are exactly the same as they were before the war. And Donald Trump hasn't achieved anything new at all. These terms that the Russians have demanded are nothing new. So it's unclear what the vice president means when he says only Donald Trump could get the sides to tell each other what each other wants. There is still the issue that Ukraine wants its sovereignty, its statehood, its decisions on foreign policy to be in its own hand. Russia wants Ukraine occupied, demilitarized, and have a regime that's compliant to it. These are the conditions that both sides have, and they are fundamentally irreconcilable. And rather than blustering over being able to reconcile those two positions, we are now seeing growing frustration in Washington and threats to walk away from a process that they themselves said would be very easy to do within 24 hours. So it's a state of where we are in Washington and negotiations with Ukraine and Russia at the moment.
Now, Oz, Ukraine's parliament will also vote to ratify that minerals deal with the US next week. Is that expected to pass without issue?
That should pass. That should just be a formality, basically. There should be no stumbling blocks on that. The Ukrainian government wants it, and the politicians are fairly satisfied with it after these serious negotiations that took place over several months to get us to this point. So no, I don't expect there to be any problems with that passing in the Ukrainian parliament.
Cadier, our correspondent in Kyiv, thank you. The Farright Alternative for Germany party, the second largest in the Bundestag, has been labelled an extremist entity. That's according to the country's domestic intelligence agency, which says the AfD threatens democracy and will now be more closely monitored. Gabriela Fesnak reports.
Germany's domestic intelligence agency BFV has officially classified the Farright Alternative for Germany party as a proven right-wing extremist organization. The decision to label the party as such means that the AfD is no longer merely under suspicion. The agency now has definitive proof that it is acting in violation of Germany's democratic system.
The assessment is clear and unambiguous. The AfD is to be classified as a confirmed right-wing extremist party because it has proven to pursue efforts against the basis of the free democratic order.
The BFV justified the decision, citing the AfD's underlying philosophy, which devalues entire segments of German society and violates their human dignity.
The AfD represents racist concepts that discriminate against entire population groups. Citizens with a history of migration are treated as second-class Germans. This clearly contradicts the guarantee of human dignity in Article 1 of the Basic Law. This attitude is reflected in racist statements, especially against immigrants and Muslims.
The move will enable the BFV to conduct more thorough surveillance of the party, including by recruiting confidential informants and intercepting communications. In practical terms, however, the party is still able to operate and take part in elections.
But symbolically, I think that is an important and perhaps also for this party problematic step, because now basically the electorate of this party will have to ask themselves, the voters, whether they really want to support an anti-systemic party that wants to destroy the Federal Republic of Germany in its current constitutional order.
AfD co-leaders Alice Weidel and Tino Chrupalla were quick to decry the move as undemocratic and vowed to take legal action.
Today's decision by the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution is a severe blow to German democracy. The AfD will continue to defend itself legally against these defamations that endanger democracy.
The AfD has previously been embroiled in several legal battles, including one where the party's regional leader was found guilty of knowingly using a Nazi slogan in a speech. Despite the continuous controversies, the party has recently celebrated its most successful federal election outcome to date and enjoys the support of prominent right-wing figures, including Elon Musk, who has debated Weidel and appeared at the party's conference.
Just weeks out from Poland's presidential election, right-wing candidate Karol Nawrocki has been granted face time with US President Donald Trump in the Oval Office. But will the Trump effect help or hinder Nawrocki's ratings? Kazimierz Słyszak reports.
The Polish presidential race will soon enter a crucial phase, and while most candidates are touring the country to gather support, one of them has chosen to seek it abroad. Conservative Karol Nawrocki, backed by the largest opposition party, Law and Justice, went to Washington on Thursday. After attending the celebrations of the National Day of Prayer, Nawrocki got what he wanted, a big thumbs up from the US President Donald Trump.
This was an opportunity for me to present my program and vision for my international policies as a candidate for President of Poland.
In an interview for a hardline conservative media outlet, Nawrocki took pride in an alleged endorsement from the US leader.
President Trump said, "You will win." I read this as him wishing me success in the upcoming election.
But will that endorsement prove to be the boost Nawrocki needs to catch up with the front-runner candidate from the ruling coalition, Rafał Trzaskowski? Former Polish President Bronisław Komorowski is not convinced.
I think there's a bit of a risk to it. From the latest opinion polls, it's clear that the vast majority of Polish people are very critical of Donald Trump's policies towards Ukraine, Europe, and Poland.
Indeed, in the latest survey, an overwhelming 66% of Poles said they viewed Trump's approach to Europe as negative. Only 27% had a positive outlook, while 7% had no opinion. Such polls are not that surprising when taking into account factors such as Donald Trump's high tariffs imposed on European steel and aluminum imports, or statements such as these.
If they don't pay, I'm not going to defend them. No, I'm not going to defend them.
But Poland does pay, currently the highest percentage of GDP on defense in all of NATO at 4.7%. And despite the Conservatives' spin on it,
that's one of their arguments for why people should vote for Karol Nawrocki. They would say that, regardless of what you think of Donald Trump, regardless of what you think of Law and Justice and Karol Nawrocki, you've got to have a head of state that can have good relations with Poland's most important and main security guarantor.
Warsaw Mayor Rafał Trzaskowski, currently boasting the biggest support in pre-election surveys, is also perfectly aware of the importance of Polish-American relations.
Because only when we are together, then we can really deter all of the countries who wants to attack us or even threaten to attack us. This is really, really important, and that's why I think that we need to hear what President Trump is saying. We need to convince other Europeans to treat security seriously.
And security is one of the topics on which Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk and US President Donald Trump have been seeing eye to eye. The US State Department earlier this week cleared Warsaw for the purchase of a robust security package worth more than €1 billion.
It is further proof of the fact that it doesn't matter who wins elections in Poland and in the US. Polish-American friendship and cooperation is unbreakable.
Poles will cast their votes in the first round of the presidential election on May 18th, with a likely top two runoff on June 1st. It remains to be seen whether Donald Trump's farms will tip the scales in Karol Nawrocki's favor or be the kiss of death right before the finish line. For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Łysiak.
TikTok has been fined more than €500 million for sending the personal data of European users to China. For many years, the popular video sharing app insisted it was doing everything by the book. But a regulator has now ruled it breached the EU's data protection rules. Our EU correspondent Alex Cadier reports from Brussels.
Well, this is one of the largest fines ever levied by the Irish data protection watchdog, of course, enforcing European law and GDPR. I want to give you a sense of how serious a breach the Commission thinks it was. As a result of TikTok's failure, they said, the social media giant did not address the potential access by Chinese authorities to personal data of users right here in the European Union, be it here in Brussels or across the bloc. A serious breach denied by TikTok. They say they will appeal the decision, but it raises a very serious questions about whether or not European data, personal European data, is safe on the TikTok platform from being handed over to the Chinese authorities. That is the explanation behind that €530 million fine against TikTok, a platform itself under very serious scrutiny at the moment. We know the Romanian elections are coming up. They had to be recalled because of investigations into TikTok looking into 25,000 accounts created ahead of that election, promoting one candidate over the other. That prompted the European Commission here to launch an investigation into TikTok as well. A lot of pressure on that social media platform, which it says is being singled out. At the same time, Apple was fined €500 million, Meta €200 million for breaching a different part of EU legislation, the Digital Markets Act, designed to make sure that those platforms do not become too powerful within the market. So clearly, the EU's mission to protect users from abuses from big social media platforms continues, with this particularly worrying allegation that TikTok shared personal data with the Chinese authorities. In Brussels, Alex Cadier for TVP World.
As the war in Ukraine drags on, the city of Odessa has been working hard to preserve its cultural inheritance. 2 years ago, it was listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but that hasn't stopped large-scale fighting at the Black Sea port. Our correspondent Don Arleth has more.
This is the National Academic Opera and Ballet Theatre, which is the architectural symbol of Odessa and one of many sites under UNESCO's protection. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, approximately 25 sites in the historic center and about 140 cultural ones have been damaged in Odessa.
Unfortunately, the status of World Heritage Site did not stop the aggressor country. And we note the fact, and I state this with all responsibility, that the strikes have not only not stopped, but as the hostilities deepen, the strikes have become more frequent. Among the most destructive attacks, of course, we can mention July 23, 2023, when the Prebryansk Cathedral, the largest Orthodox cathedral in Ukraine in terms of scale, was damaged by a direct missile hit. And we can also note the date of November 15, 2024, when several drones hit residential buildings, cultural and historical monuments, and the residents of residential buildings suffered the most. We can also note January 29, 2025, when the Bristol Hotel, one of the most prominent agricultural monuments, was directly hit by 3 ballistic missiles in the very center of the city, in the heart of the historic building. And this caused a great deal of damage to the buildings that are located near this hotel.
As the fighting continues, the enhanced protection status granted by UNESCO is still not replaced by Russia. However, these special blue shield emblems are signs of hope to Ukraine, that one day they will be able to hold Russia accountable.
With the colours red and white on full display across the country, Poland celebrated its National Flag Day on Friday. And despite it being a relatively new addition to the holiday calendar, the celebrations are deeply rooted in pride and heritage. Sasha Farbach reports.
All across Poland, from the Baltic coast, Szczecin in the west, and the Polish capital in Warsaw in the heart of the country. May 2nd is a special day which honors the red and white flag of Poland. Holiday is widely revered by Poles.
This is patriotism, our national identity. It represents future generations and whole history, what our grandparents, parents, and past generations did for Poland to make it what it is today.
Polish National Flag Day, celebrated on May 2nd, is a relatively recent addition to the country's calendar, introduced only in 2004. Though a modern holiday, it holds deep significance for many Poles, falling between International Workers' Day and Constitution Day on May 3rd. The holiday has quickly become one that resonates strongly with national pride and heritage.
On the 2nd of May, on the capture of Berlin in 1945, the Poles actually hung their flag up on one of the greatest monuments in Berlin because we were the first victims and the first victims of violence from the Third Reich, from the Germans. So it's a kind of like, do you know what? Here we are, we have finally taken you over, and look at our glory.
The Polish flag, with origins dating back to 1182, officially adopted its white and red colors in 1792, marking the first anniversary of the declaration of the Constitution of May 3rd. The color white symbolizes purity and nobility, while red stands for fire and blood. In recent years, the flag has become a powerful symbol of national pride.
During communism, you couldn't celebrate anything to do with the Flag Day. It was Workers' Day, and then that was it. There was no Constitution Day at all. So on Workers' Day, that's it. You got rid of everything, all the flags, nothing could last till the 3rd. So there's that kind of little jump there to say, yeah, let's keep our flags going from the 1st to the 2nd to the 3rd.
Despite its short history, the holiday is one of great significance and, according to some experts, binds together Poles from around the world.
I love that we can unite under this one flag, and it doesn't matter if you're Polish in America or Polish in Britain or wherever you are based around the world. This one flag does unite us all.
These are the national colors. We are attached to them. It's our love for Poland. This is a very important national symbol and something that every Polish family should cherish.
While Polish National Flag Day is a relatively new holiday in the official calendar, the pride and connection to Poland's national colors run deep, rooted in centuries of history, and will continue to resonate in the future. Sasha Farbach, TVP World.
We return now to our top story, the ongoing peace talks in Ukraine. And joining me to break it all down is Diane Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Good evening, Diane. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
So can I start with these comments from the State Department's Tammy Bruce? She says the US will no longer be mediators and that they will not fly around the world at the drop of a hat. Are we heading towards America pulling out of peace talks completely, of pulling through on their threat?
Well, there's a lot of statements being made by a lot of different people, but what we do know has happened is that this mineral rights deal between the United States and Ukraine has been signed. It's agreeable to Ukrainians. It's quite beneficial in terms of security because obviously the Americans now have an economic stake in the rebuilding and redevelopment of Ukraine and its resources. And there's also some statements in there that make it very clear that the Americans agreed to that this was as a result of the invasion by the Russians. That's the first time they've actually come out and said it's the Russians' fault and so on. So essentially what we have happening now, and this doesn't end the shooting, unfortunately, necessarily, but it's a good step, is that the Putin has been told you've got as much as you're going to get, and the rest of it belongs to the West, and we're going to be doing business here. And the agreement apparently also doesn't discount the possibility that Ukraine can join the European Union. So on that level, it's good news. But on the other level, Mr. Putin has to abide by any truce and sit down at the table and talk to Ukraine about ending the shooting.
So how should Kyiv read into comments like this when we talk about the US no longer being mediators, that they won't fly around the world at the drop of a hat? Obviously, they've also signed, as you mentioned, that minerals deal. Do you think Ukraine will still be worried about the US flip-flopping on a position?
Well, the U.S., my understanding is the U.S. will still be talking and still be involved in trying to bring Russia and Ukraine to the table. But, there's obviously, they have declared an interest in Ukraine's future, which is significant. They're not going to put boots on the ground, but this deal also doesn't preclude the possibility that European peacekeepers can come in to keep the peace once a truce is agreed to between both sides. And the European Union membership is very critical. And so that really means that I think the Americans want to hand off the Ukrainian problem, what's left of it, to Europe, to finance it, to give it humanitarian military aid. Although after the deal was announced, Trump asked Congress for $50 million more in military assistance to Ukraine. So, it's not a withdrawal altogether. It is a climb down, but it does solve, I think, part of the security issue.
You mentioned military support for Ukraine. Where does that sit in terms of the future of that? I mean, do you think that we will see a future where the US completely withdraws military support from Ukraine while a war is still ongoing? And is that worst case scenario for Kyiv?
Well, the U.S. has given no direct military support to Ukraine. They've certainly given hundreds of billions of dollars in money for weaponry and ammunition. I would think this could continue. As I say, he just asked Congress to allocate another $50 million for that purpose, and now I think the expectation is that Europe has to take on the rest of it. The United States also said that point blank that Russia shall make no profit from this war, and that the rebuilding of Ukraine will be done without any Russian involvement whatsoever, of course. And so he's declared a line in the sand, and now it's up to Putin to determine whether he can keep playing games by calling truces and then breaking them.
I want to play a quick soundbite from President Trump just in recent weeks. Remember this?
Thinking that very strongly that they both want peace, but they have to get to the table. We're waiting a long time. They have to get them to the table, and I think we're going to get peace. I don't like that it takes long at all, but I think they both want to make peace. I do believe so.
So he told us he would end the war in Ukraine fast. He told us Vladimir Putin there wants peace. Do you think Donald Trump and his administration, they really are starting to feel like this is harder than he might have thought at the beginning?
Well, Donald Trump was wrong to assume that Putin wanted peace. Putin started the war. Putin wasn't defending his homeland. He started it. And he wanted to take over all of Ukraine and as much of Poland and elsewhere as he could. So what he's now done, Trump, is he's abandoned this ridiculous notion that Putin even wants peace. And he has been quite upset by the fact that Putin has, talked about truces, declared truces, and then kept killing innocent Ukrainian civilians. And so, this is coming down to a point now where the Americans have declared an interest, a security arrangement, an economic arrangement with Ukraine. The Europeans have to take the handoff, and now it's going to be different. There's more pressure on Putin than before. It will be very interesting if Putin continues to play this game.
Now, while you're here, I'm interested to ask you just quickly about Germany as well. The AfD now facing increased surveillance because of Friday's ruling as an extremist entity. In your view, is this a big deal? What does it mean in practice?
Well, obviously, there's some bad characters in the AfD, as there are in a lot of right-wing parties around the world. And when I say right wing, I mean right wing vis-a-vis support for Russia or Putin. That's obvious, and so that's what's happening. And the fact that they're under surveillance and have been declared a legal organization is a sign that the Germans do not want them to be part of their governance system, which I think is probably a healthy sign. There are right of center parties all over Europe and all over the world, but very few of them are openly pro-Putin, with the exception of Hungary, which, frankly, I think should be kicked out of the European Union.
And what could this mean for, talking of the US and talking of Germany-US relations? And I ask that because just before we went to air, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, put out a statement noting that, quote, Germany just gave its spy agency new powers to surveil the opposition. That's not democracy, it's tyranny in disguise. What do you make of that?
Well, they seem to, they have waded in before. Vance did that. The vice president did that. Waded in before because they just didn't like the political correctness that they saw in some of the other countries where anybody right of center, and they don't have to be pro-Putin, but anybody right of center, is considered a scourge and a problem. And, that applied in every country is different. And so I think that the Americans really have no business butting into the affairs of Germany. If their espionage service believes that there's Russian nonsense going on and destructive nonsense going on in the AfD, they have every right in the world to surveil them, and I hope they do. Likewise, I would hope that if the Democrats or the Republicans in the U.S. had members that were fiddling around with the bad guys, they would be surveilled. So the Americans have a habit of A, not doing their homework internationally, and B, wading in even though they haven't.
Diane Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Always a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you again for your time.
You're welcome. Anytime.
And that's all for World News tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.